You hear that? That's the sound of mother flipping football. It is week 1 NFL recap. Let's get it! Eagles versus Cowboys. This was a really entertaining and also bizarre way to kick off the season, as this game will be remembered forever as Jalen Carter spitting on Dak Prescott and he got ejected for it. And he'll possibly get suspended or possibly fined. But as for the game itself, it was actually competitive until Mother Nature delayed the game for an hour. And then the game really ended when CeeDee Lamb dropped on what could have been a first down for the Cowboys, but he dropped it and gave the Eagles a 24-20 win. Hurts did really well in the air with 152 passing yards and did really good on the ground for 62 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns, and Saquon Barkley scoring a rushing touchdown. Dak Prescott, on the other hand, he did actually pretty well in this game, throwing 188 passing yards, but didn't throw a touchdown pass, which is kind of weird. But the biggest star on the Cowboys was surprisingly Javonte Williams, who had 54 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. And Dallas could have taken the lead when they were down by 4, but Miles Sanders fumbled the ball and it was recovered by the Eagles. And then, of course, Mother Nature just had to ruin everything. And after an hour of waiting, nobody scored after that. And the game ended when CeeDee Lamb, who was having himself a really good day, dropped the ball. Not once, but twice. Overall, a great game between Philly and Dallas. Chargers versus Chiefs. Finally, another Chiefs game that wasn't determined by the refs bailing them out like they always seem to do. And the Chargers, they had themselves one hell of a day. The biggest star of the game was obviously Justin Herbert. 25 for 34, 318 yards, and 3 touchdowns. And the 2 touchdowns were from Quentin Johnston, who had 2 touchdowns, and Keenan Allen with 1 touchdown. And as for the Chiefs, Patrick Mahomes looked kind of underwhelming in the first half, but he finally got stuff going in the second half, and he played phenomenal too, with 258 passing yards and 1 touchdown, and also 1 touchdown on the ground. And if you check out the receiving core for the Chiefs, they really didn't do anything. And I know Travis Kelce had a touchdown, but really, he was a ghost outside of that 1 touchdown. And this game is also famous for Travis Kelce making contact with Xavier Worthy, who was out of the game with a shoulder injury. And on the Chiefs' defense, someone named Drew Tranquill had 2 sacks. I love watching the Chiefs lose. I really do. It doesn't happen very often, but when it does, it's awesome. Thanks, Chargers. Colts versus Dolphins. How in the world did the Colts beat the ever-living snot out of the Dolphins? And the biggest culprit was Tua. He had 3 turnovers, 2 in which were interceptions. And Tyreek Hill literally did nothing, and the only thing that he did really memorable in this game was his meltdown on the sidelines. And the star of this game was, surprisingly, Daniel Jones, who had 272 yards in the air, 1 passing touchdown to Michael Pittman Jr., and ran for 2 touchdowns on the ground. So congrats to the Colts, and for the Dolphins, they're probably screwed after that performance. Jets versus Steelers. This was a really entertaining game, and there were 2 big stars for the Steelers. Aaron Rodgers, who had 22 for 30, 244 yards and 4 touchdowns. And Chris Boswell nailing a 60-yard field goal with 1:03 left to go for the Steelers. And the game famously ended when Justin Fields scrambled out of the pocket, and instead of running for a first down, he decided to pass it to Garrett Wilson, which was broken up by Jalen Ramsey to end the game and give the Steelers the win. Aaron Rodgers beat his former team, and Justin Fields lost to his former team. What a crazy world we live in, folks. Jaguars versus Panthers. I mean, I really didn't watch this game, but all I know is that Bryce Young looked really horrendous in this game, committing 2 turnovers. Meanwhile, for the Jaguars, Trevor Lawrence did his job really well, and so did Brian Thomas Jr., and including Travis Hunter, who played both receiver and corner. And let's not forget Travis Etienne, who ran for 143 yards and averaged 8.9 yards per carry. And as of me recording this video, Tank Bigsby was traded to the Eagles after averaging 2.4 yards per carry in the game against Carolina. So yeah, good for the Jags, I guess. Saints versus Cardinals. This was a really entertaining game, to say the least, and it really came down to the last play. And the biggest star of this game was Kyler Murray. 163 yards and 2 touchdowns. And down 20-13, New Orleans was trying to march down the field to send this game into overtime. And deep in Arizona territory on 4th down, Spencer Rattler threw a pass and it was incomplete to give the Cardinals a win. And now Spencer Rattler is 0-7 as a starter. How awesome is that? This is the Lord and Savior of Louisiana, ladies and gentlemen. Commanders versus Giants. Who would have guessed that the Commanders would beat the ever-living snot out of the New Jersey Giants? And yes, I know they represent New York, but they play New Jersey. False advertisement. But as for the game itself, it was kind of a boring one-sided game. Look at the scoring summary. Just really look at it. There were barely any scoring in this game. The biggest stars of this game, however, was Jaden Daniels, who had 233 yards and 1 touchdown, and JCM, who had 10 carries for 82 yards and a touchdown. Falcons versus Buccaneers. This was a really entertaining game between 2 NFC South teams, and it was back and forth the entire way through, and it came down to the last play of the game, which we'll get to in a minute. The biggest star for the Buccaneers was Baker Mayfield, who had 167 passing yards and 3 touchdowns, and also rushed for 39 yards on 5 carries, and Emeka Mbuka, who had a really good NFL debut, who had 4 receptions for 67 yards and 2 touchdowns. Meanwhile, for the Falcons, Michael Penix Jr. played a really good game with 298 yards and 1 touchdown, even though his rushing touchdown really shouldn't have counted because he lost a little bit of control of the ball when he scored on a rushing touchdown, but whatever. Bijan Robinson, however, he had a really impressive receiving touchdown, and he also had 100 yards. I'm sorry. 100 receiving yards. And the game famously ended when Younghoe Koo was set up for a game-tying touchdown to send the game into overtime, but he missed wide left to give the Buccaneers a win. And I know my team got bailed out big time by that missed field goal, but hey, win's a win, guys, so yeah. Go Bucks, baby! Browns versus Bengals. As a Bengals fan, I'm happy we won, but it was bittersweet to say the least, because Cleveland did miss a field goal and we got away with a bunch of interceptions, but I don't know. It just feels like a bittersweet victory, in my opinion. Joe Flacco had a frustrating day, who committed 2 interceptions, which wasn't really his fault, because his receivers dropped a pass which turned into an interception by Jordan Battle and DJ Turner II. Meanwhile, for the Bengals, Joe Burrow had a pretty solid game, 113 passing yards and a touchdown, and which that touchdown was from Noah Fant. And I'm going to be honest with you guys, receiving for us really wasn't that impressive because the biggest receiver on our team was T. Higgins, who had 3 receptions for 33 yards. I mean, just look at these stats by our receivers today. Jamar Chase had 2 receptions for 26 yards. Absolutely gross. Despite the frustrating victory for the Bengals, I'm just happy we finally get a Week 1 win. And a lot of people say we couldn't do it either. So go Bengals! Patriots versus Raiders. And because I didn't watch this game that much, I'm going to make it quick. The Raiders upset the heavily favored New England Patriots thanks to Geno Smith, Ashton Jeanty, and the Las Vegas Raiders. And they played a really good game. Geno Smith had 162 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 pick. And Ashton Jeanty had 19 carries for 38 yards and 1 touchdown. And meanwhile, for Drake May, it was a frustrating day. 287 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. And Travion Henderson had 5 carries for 27 yards. So, yeah. Next. Seahawks versus 49ers. This was a boring and yet again entertaining game, and there wasn't really much scoring, and the game famously ended when Seattle was trying to possibly score a game-winning touchdown, but Nick Bosa strip sacked Sam Darnold and was recovered by the Niners to give them the win. But it was a bittersweet ending for the Niners, as Brock Purdy is injured and questionable for Week 2, and star tight end George Kittle is placed on IR and will miss 3 to 4 weeks. Get pumped, Niners fans. This is going to be your quarterback next week. Probably. Broncos versus Titans. A awesome win for the Broncos. Meanwhile, Bo Nix, he had a somewhat frustrating game, committing 2 interceptions, but threw for 176 yards and a touchdown, and it was enough to squeak this 20-12 win over the Titans. Meanwhile, for the Titans, Cam Ward, he did his job well, and he got let down by his teammates because everybody is garbage. Your receiving leader was Tony Pollard, and he's a running back. And shout out to Courtland Sutton for the Broncos, who had 6 receptions for 61 yards and a touchdown. And overall, a 20-12 Broncos win sounds about right. So, next. Packers versus Lions. There are 2 things we can take away from this game. One, the Lions played really horrendous virtually the entire game, and they did not even score a touchdown until the 4th quarter, which is really mind-blowing. So does that make Dan Campbell a product of Ben Johnson? Maybe, but I'm not ready to jump the gun yet. Meanwhile, the Packers, they played phenomenal virtually the entire way through. Jordan Love had a pretty good game, 188 yards and 2 touchdowns. And the game is mostly famous for Micah Parsons getting his first sack on Jared Goff as a Green Bay Packer. And I must admit that was incredible. I'm not a Packers fan, but that is awesome. Rams versus Texans. This was probably the worst game of the week. Both teams played horrible virtually the entire game. And the team that felt the most uncomfortable was Houston, as CJ Stroud played horrible. 188 yards and 1 interception and multiple sacks taken. And I get his offensive line is terrible, but man, it just sucks that he played that horrendous this game. Meanwhile, for the Rams, there were 3 key contributors in this win. Stafford, who had 245 passing yards and a touchdown. Kareem Williams having 18 carries for 66 yards and a touchdown. And Puka Nacua with 10 receptions for 130 yards. So, congrats to the Rams, I guess. Bills versus Ravens on Sunday Night Football. This was the best game of the week. And when I say the best, I mean the best game of the week. After Derrick Henry ran for a awesome touchdown run to make it 40-25, it looked like Baltimore was going to win it. And they only had less than 4 minutes left. But Buffalo would not give up, as Josh Allen threw a snipe to Dalton Kincaid, and it bounced off and landed into the hands of Keon Coleman for a touchdown. They tried to go for a 2-point conversion, but it failed. And as Baltimore was driving, Derrick Henry fumbled the ball, and it was recovered by Buffalo. They scored on a rushing touchdown with Josh Allen to make it 40-38. And Baltimore forced a 3-and-out. Buffalo got the ball. They drove deep in Baltimore territory, and their backup kicker nailed a game-winning field goal as the clock hit 0 to win 41-40. Josh Allen is the luckiest guy in the world. He won an MVP, he married Haley Steinfeld, and he managed to pull off an insane comeback in Week 1 at Buffalo against the Baltimore Ravens. As for the Ravens, it was a heartbreaking loss, but as long as Lamar Jackson is healthy, the Ravens should be fine. And this game was also memorable for Lamar Jackson pushing a Bills fan after he was pushing and shoving him and DeAndre Hopkins after D-Hop's one-handed grab for a touchdown. And I know the Bills fan shouldn't be pushing and shoving opposing players, but Lamar shouldn't really engage and push him right back. And the NFL actually got involved and banned this Bills fan from attending Bills games and NFL games indefinitely. And finally, Bears versus Vikings on Monday Night Football. What looked like an easy Bears win turned out to be a Vikings comeback. As J.J. McCarthy, he looked really horrendous for the first 3 quarters, committing a brutal pick 6, and generally couldn't get anything going. But then he finally woke up in the 4th quarter and scoring 21 unanswered points, including a rushing touchdown to give Minnesota the lead, and Chicago fell apart. But you won't believe this, but Caleb Williams did really well in the air and on the ground and somehow lost. I am stunned, I tell you. It's really frustrating that the Bears starting quarterback, who paints his nails, literally blew this game after looking really amazing for the first 3 quarters of this game. So does that mean Caleb Williams and JJ McCarthy switch bodies Freaky Friday style? Maybe, but we'll never know. Regardless, it is a huge win for the Vikings after being down 17-6 and pulled out a 27-24 victory.